Hello, and welcome to the Jared Hurst Podcast. This podcast is about understanding ourselves, others, and the tools you can use in order to transform your life. This week, we're going to talk about emotional layers. But before I get into that, I have a few things that I need to say. First off, I would love to apologize. If you are a regular listener of the podcast, you've probably noticed I've been absent for a little bit. It's been about 2.5 weeks, and I've never gone that long without releasing a podcast episode. There's a number of reasons for that. I've been working on my breathwork certification, which, by the way, I am in love with breathwork. It's so powerful. If you are interested in a free, yes, free breathwork session, please contact me. I am happy to come to you, go to a studio, do a group. I'm doing a lot of different experiences right now as I'm getting my hours in for my certification. So if that's something that you have heard about in one of my episodes, or you don't really know what it is, but you're interested, please contact me. That's definitely something that I would appreciate, and I think you will appreciate because it is powerful stuff. To put it mildly, as soon as I did my first breathwork session, I immediately decided I wanted to go learn how to teach it. That's how powerful it was for me. So there's that. Now, with that said, back to my podcast. You will notice that my introduction and the main body of my podcast may sound different. You'll definitely notice a small glip where I'm splicing two different videos together. The reason for that is I usually shoot my entire episode as one video, post it to social media, and let you consume the content. When I recorded everything, the first 2.5 minutes had major audio issues. I think I've finally figured out what's going on with that after maybe 20 different re-records of me trying to re-record this introduction. So please let this be the one that goes through and works. But anyway, you'll notice a difference. So if you hear a difference, notice a difference. That's why I had to re-record it. Hopefully no more problems in that. Also, I am trying to take my podcast from one where I do a lot of solo speaking to something where I have more discussions and interviews. So if you know of somebody that would like to be on the podcast, or you think would be good on it, or if you think you would be good on a podcast episode, please contact me. Probably the easiest way to reach me is on Instagram at Jared B. Hurst. Just send me a direct message and I will happily respond and we can figure something out. And I should have a number of guests here in the next few weeks. Hopefully you're liking that. Any feedback, if you like the dialogues, you like where we're having a discussion or an interview, if you like it where it's just me, I'd love to hear your feedback and how I can make the podcast better and more exciting for all of you. Without further ado, here is Emotional Layers. Emotional layers. This is a reason why I haven't posted as much lately, and that is because I've been dealing with some emotions. Over the last 3 years, I've been spending a lot of time working on myself, working on my identity, working on my ability to cope and regulate my emotions, etc., etc. And over that time, I've grown in a lot of different ways. I've learned that one of the keys to emotion is learning to feel into and experience that emotion. Now, that does not mean that we ruminate on an emotion over and over again until it becomes habitual. The last thing we want in our lives is to have depression or toxic grief or sadness or whatever. Maybe toxic isn't the right word, but we don't want to have an emotion that is constantly affecting us day in and day out. But it is important to allow ourselves to feel emotion. So over the last 3 years, I've worked really hard at learning to have what I would consider a healthy relationship with emotions and learning how to work through those things. And I feel like I've really gotten there. Here's the thing about emotions. Emotions have layers. You'll deal with an emotion, and maybe deal's not the right word. You'll experience an emotion, probably a healthier way of expressing it. You'll experience an emotion, and you'll allow yourself to feel into that emotion and work through it and process it and allow it to dissipate after it's had its time. And then what you'll find is on certain things, that emotion will come back up. See, there's three key elements to having an emotion. One, there's times that what you want to do is you want to understand the emotion. You want to know, what is it that's causing this emotion to come up inside of me? And once you understand that emotion and you figure out why it's there, sometimes they resolve on their own, and that's it. Second thing when it comes to emotion is sometimes we just need to allow it to feel. Sometimes it comes, we feel like crying, we allow ourselves to cry, and it's done and it's processed. We feel like screaming, we scream in a healthy way. Allow ourselves to get out those feelings of frustration, and then it goes away. And then the third thing is, there's times with an emotion where what we need to do is we need to feel into it and intensify that emotion. We need to really dig in and allow ourselves to process that and to let it go. But at the same time, we don't, like I said, we don't want to make it an habitual emotion where we're constantly feeding it over and over and over again. Well, after you have done one of those three things, sometimes that emotion will come back up at a later time. One of my mentors, Henry Amar, likes to say that our emotions show up when we are ready for them. Our emotions show up when we are ready for them. And I've looked at my life and I can see time and time and time again where an emotion has shown up and I'm in the space to handle that emotion. I'm in a really good, happy, joyous space. I'm growing, I'm developing. I look at my life right now and that's really where I'm at. I'm working on my breathwork certification. I'm really happy with that. I'm doing my podcast. I'm in a good mental state. I feel really good about myself as a person. Like, I've got all these things going for myself right now. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I started feeling down and sad. Now, I've been doing this long enough and I've been working on it long enough where I can usually figure out what it is I'm feeling by asking myself a series of questions and kind of feeling into it. And I did that process and I still couldn't quite figure out what it was. And luckily, I ended up going on this trip on my own, just me. And as I'm on this trip, I had a lot of time to think about my life, to process, to contemplate what it was that I was feeling inside. And over time, I recognized something. I felt sadness. It felt like it had something to do with past relationships. So I started exploring those relationships. I started looking at different relationships that I'd had and trying to feel whether or not something felt stronger than the other. Went through different people. And the truth is, there was a little bit in a couple different people, and then one in particular that was really strong. And this really strong emotion around this one individual is something that I have processed multiple times. And I've worked through it multiple times. So I started asking myself, well, is there something I'm doing wrong? Is there something that I have not processed properly in order to work through this? And here's the thing. There are certain emotions that take more processing, that have different layers to them, When you look at regret, when you look at grief, they're both about a sense of loss. Now, with regret, at some point you can choose to let go of that regret. You can choose to reframe your mind and the way that you look at that situation and recognize that you did the best that you could in the moment, or recognize that continuing to regret something isn't going to change the outcome. That already happened, it's come, it's gone, and you learn to accept it. And grief is a really, really tricky emotion. I think, in my opinion, it's probably the most difficult emotion for us to deal with. Because grief is about a sense of loss around somebody that we've loved, or an experience, or something of that sort. So, when is the point in your life where you no longer feel a sense of loss about that situation, about that person? I don't think there is. I spoke with my parents about this because they've been around a little bit longer than I have. When I look at my life, I've lost some grandparents at a younger age. I've lost some great grandparents, but I hadn't really lost really intense relationships and individuals until recently, within the last 6, 7 years. Divorce, my brother, and then I'm faced with the situation around my parents and how long are they going to be around. And so I wouldn't say that I have a lot of context for at what point do you stop grieving. So I was asking my parents, I said, you've lost some really important people in your life. They haven't lost the relationships like I have, because they've been married for 50 years, but they've lost people. And so I said, at what point do you feel like that ever goes away? Do you feel like you're always feeling a sense of loss around that person? And my mom started to talk and she said, I lost my parents, and I believe it's been about 20, 25 years now. And she said, it still hurts. And I started thinking about that. It got me really thinking about grief and about loss. And the question I think to ask, here's the question. When should you stop feeling a sense of loss around somebody that you've loved that is no longer there or has left for some reason? I don't think there ever is. Why should you not feel a sense of loss around somebody who has passed away? Why shouldn't you feel a sense of loss over a relationship that you loved but didn't work out? I think there comes a point in our lives where we get better and better at accepting that loss. It becomes, with healthy grief, it becomes less frequent. But that doesn't mean that we should expect ourselves to stop feeling that emotion, that should never come up again. That we should reach a point that says, I know this person left that I really loved. And I really wanted to have a life with them. But I no longer need to hurt because that happened. I no longer need to feel pain when I think about how things could have worked out and how I played a role in them not working out, or they played a role in them not working out. Regret is one of those things that I've gotten better at. For a long period of my life, I had some massive regrets about some things that happened very early in my life. And eventually, I forgave myself, recognized that I'm only human, I'm not perfect, and chose to move on and accept what had happened and not continue to beat myself up over it. So when we're dealing with these layers of emotion, when we have an emotion, we deal with it. It moves on. And then months down the road, years down the road, we feel that emotion again around that same thing. There may be a new layer of understanding that we need to go into. As I was contemplating this connection that didn't work out a number of years ago, and I tried to understand the grief that I was feeling, I went through and I allowed myself to experience the things that I hadn't experienced. Now, you got to be careful with this. When we are dealing with grief and we make a new memory that has not ever occurred with a person who is no longer with us, that can affect our ability for our mind to go through the grieving process. We can have repetitive grief. We can have, I can't remember the word that I'm looking for, but you can basically have grief that doesn't heal, that becomes chronic. We'll use chronic. Chronic's a good word. You can have chronic grief when you don't allow yourself to accept that that person is gone. With that said, when I looked at this relationship, there were things that I hadn't said to this person, and I needed a resource in order to let out those emotions. So in my head, I made up a scenario and I yelled at this person. And I expressed the pain that I'd had and the pain that I've continued to have. And I allowed myself, mentally in my mind, to let out those emotions and process and allow those emotions to resolve that were still inside of me. Because I don't think that I'd gone to that level yet. There's this new level that I needed to deal with. I'd been here, and then I went deeper to a new level and found there was some other emotion there. And that other emotion was there because of situations that I hadn't been able to fully resolve. Frustrations, anger, sadness, grief, remorse, etc., that I hadn't been able to express. And so by allowing myself to go into this virtual realm in my head and have this conversation with this person, I was able to work through that in a new way, and it resolved. I'd been dealing with this emotion for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and I didn't quite understand it. And once I went through this good hour and a half of crying and anger and frustration and everything else that came up, I've felt significantly better since then because I had a new layer to deal with. And because I was in a good, healthy, emotional state. My mind recognized that I was in a spot where I could deal with something. Emotions are like onions. They have layers. To steal a Shrek line. As you have these new layers of emotion, I think the key point is not to judge yourself, not to put a label on yourself and a restriction on yourself of this is what should happen. I should have dealt with this. I shouldn't hurt about this person anymore. Why not? I was on a Zoom call with somebody that is training me into breath work. And we were talking about romance, we were talking about love, and they said, society has this belief that you're only supposed to love one person. Why can't you continue to love that person as you move on and find someone new to love? I thought about that a lot since she said that. I think that's a really healthy way of looking at it. When you look at grief and you look at the way that science has approached grief, and the way that they say to help through the grieving process. One of the things that is recommended in order to help our minds cope with grief is to look at that situation and have gratitude for the moments that occurred. At the same time, we accept the reality of what is. It's the key point here. This is not a podcast on grief. This is a podcast on emotion. The key point in that is that we can appreciate and love something that is no longer for us. Those moments don't have to turn into terrible, ugly memories. We can have beautiful memories about something that's happened, and at the same time accept that that is no longer for us and move forward. If you have anger and you feel angry about something and you allow yourself to express it in a healthy way, you scream in the car, you punch a pillow, whatever it might be, and then later you feel angry about that same experience, that is also okay. Each emotion that we have has different layers to it because there is more meaning in our mind around it, around that situation. I'll give you an example. If I have something that hurt me and I am angry about it because of how I was treated, that can be one layer. On the other hand, if I feel regret about something that I didn't do, that's another layer. So on one level, I deal with the anger of how I was treated. I let it resolve, and all of a sudden it comes back again. It's because now I have the regret that I need to deal with. I have this regret over here, and that is another part of the whole around this emotion, around this experience. Each one will show up, and each one needs to be resolved individually. And some emotions, it's that. We're done, it's past. It's these complex situations, these complex experiences that have multiple layers to them. So be compassionate with yourself. Recognize that you are a human being. You make mistakes. You have regrets. You feel loss. You recognize how you can do better or could have done better. You can't change the past, but you can accept what has happened, and you can choose who you want to be tomorrow and who you want to be today. I believe in you. I know you can do it. Until next time, remember that you are not alone.